The air felt colder that day, as if the world itself had taken a deep, sorrowful breath. Emma sat on the worn couch, staring at the empty spot where Theo used to lie, his tail wagging, eyes full of love. The silence in her apartment was deafening now, a stark contrast to the constant thumping of his paws against the floor, the soft hum of his breath as he slept beside her at night. She never imagined it would come to this, to a moment where she would be forced to say goodbye to the one soul who had truly understood her. In his eyes, there was always unconditional acceptance. No words were ever needed. He was there when the world was too much, when the weight of the day threatened to crush her spirit. Theo had been her rock, her constant, and now in the stillness of an empty room, she realized she had given him everything. But in the end, love wasn't just about being together in life. It was about letting go when the time came. Yet how could you ever truly let go of someone who had been your world for so long? Emma had always dreamed of having a dog. As a child, she would spend hours at the park watching dogs chase frisbees, wagging their tails, and running in circles with uncontained joy. She marveled at the ease with which they lived, playful, carefree, and so full of life. But no matter how much she yearned for one, life never quite granted her that simple wish. A constant sense of absence marked her childhood. The family she grew up in was fractured, distant, each member wrapped up in their struggles, leaving Emma to fend for herself in the silence that filled their home. The emptiness of her early years clung to her like a shadow, long after she had moved out and started living on her own. Now, at 29, living in a quiet, modest apartment by herself, she often felt that ache, a hollowness that no amount of books, music, or work could ever fill. She surrounded herself with distractions, hoping the weight of solitude would become more bearable. But it didn't. The evenings were the hardest, when the quiet felt unbearable, and she couldn't ignore the longing in her heart anymore.
One particularly gloomy afternoon, Emma walked home in the rain, her umbrella useless against the steady downpour. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, from another long day at the office. The gray clouds above matched the heaviness in her chest. She passed the shelter on her usual route, the one she had seen so many times but had never been brave enough to enter. The small wooden sign swayed gently in the wind, its words faintly visible through the mist. Adopt a friend. Change a life. She paused, for reasons she couldn't explain. Something tugged at her, an inexplicable pull toward the shelter's door. The thought of a dog had always been a distant dream, a wish that felt just out of reach. But today, for a reason she couldn't fully understand, that dream seemed to be calling her. She stepped forward, feeling the pull in her chest deepen, and walked through the door. Inside, the shelter smelled like wet fur and the faint scent of disinfectant. It was a small, simple place, but it was filled with dogs, each one wagging its tail or barking, hoping to attract attention. Emma felt her heart quicken as she looked at the rows of cages, each dog with its own story, a history of abandonment, of neglect, of being forgotten. Some dogs jumped up against the bars, eager to get close, while others lay silently, resigned to their fate. But then her eyes landed on him. He was a scruffy golden retriever, his coat matted and unkempt, his eyes full of a sadness Emma knew too well. He was tucked in the farthest corner of the shelter, watching the world around him with quiet, weary eyes. His fur was dull, and his once strong frame seemed to have lost its energy, like he had given up on the idea of ever being loved. He didn't bark or jump or beg for attention like the others. He simply watched, his gaze steady and unyielding, as though he already knew he was waiting for something or someone. As Emma stepped closer, her heart ached. She had seen so many dogs before, each one hopeful, full of life and love to give. But this dog was different. His eyes seemed to reach into her very soul, whispering that he, too, understood loneliness. And in that instant, Emma knew. She knew that he wasn't just any dog. He was the one. She knelt down to his level, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached out to him. He did not move at first. There was no frantic scrambling, no jumping for affection. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she reached through the bars and gently touched his head. The moment her hand made contact with his fur, he lifted his head slowly, as though testing her. His coat was rough under her fingers, but as her hand continued to stroke him, he seemed to relax, leaning into her touch. It was a simple gesture, but to Emma, it felt monumental. Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. She did not understand why, but it was as if the entire world had faded away, leaving only her and this dog, the noise of the shelter, the rain tapping on the windows, the distant sound of other people had all disappeared in that moment. She could feel his quiet sadness, and somehow it mirrored her own. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her loneliness, and in that moment, she knew that this was meant to be. She sat there for what felt like hours, her hand resting on his head as he leaned into her, his eyes slowly closing in contentment. The connection was so simple, yet so profound. No word were needed. In the silence of that moment, Emma felt the warmth of something she had been searching for all her life: companionship, understanding, and an unconditional kind of love. Finally, the shelter worker approached, interrupting the quiet moment between them. "Would you like to meet him?" the worker asked softly, as though she could sense the bond that had already formed. Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I will take him," she whispered, more to herself than to the worker. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't a choice. It was simply the way things were meant to be. The worker smiled gently and unlocked the cage, allowing Emma to lead the dog out into the shelter's small yard. The dog, which had been so still just moments before, now lifted his head with a new sense of curiosity. He walked beside her, slow but steady, as though he, too, knew that something had shifted in the air. They were no longer strangers. They were two souls who had found each other in a world that had been too big and too cold. As Emma looked down at the dog, her heart swelled with something she couldn't fully name. Peace, perhaps, or hope. But whatever it was something she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she wasn't alone. She bent down, placing her hand on his back, and whispered softly, "Thank you for finding me." The dog looked up at her, his big brown eyes softening, and wagged his tail for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. In that moment, Emma knew her life was about to change forever. She hadn't just found a dog, she had found a companion, a friend, and maybe, just maybe, a piece of herself that had been lost for far too long. And as she walked out of the shelter, Theo by her side, the world felt just a little less lonely. From the moment Theo stepped into Emma's life, everything changed. The quiet apartment she had once inhabited now felt alive with his presence. His paws patted softly across the hardwood floors, and the sound of his gentle breathing became a constant companion in the background of her days. His tail, wagging eagerly whenever she returned home from work, reminded her that someone, no matter how small, was always waiting for her. The stillness she had grown so accustomed to be no longer her reality. It was filled with the warmth of Theo's companionship. At night, when the weight of the world seemed heavier and the loneliness crept in from the edges of her mind, Theo was there. He would curl up by her feet, his warm body a quiet comfort. His presence steady, grounding made the room feel less empty. His soft sighs as he slept, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, became the lullaby Emma never knew she needed. It was as if In those moments, the house wasn't just a place to sleep, but a home filled with love, even if unspoken. Emma wasn't alone anymore. Theo was everything she had hoped for. He wasn't just a dog. He was a companion who showed her the kind of loyalty and gentleness that only a heart untouched by the weight of human disappointment could provide. There was a purity in the way he looked at her, eyes wide and trusting, that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. There were mornings when the sky was heavy with gray, and the weight of the world outside her window seemed unbearable. Emma would lie in bed, unable to summon the strength to face the day, the dark clouds of depression threatening to pull her under. But Theo, with his quiet wisdom, would nudge her gently with his nose, a soft reminder that there was still life to live, still beauty to find. He didn't ask for anything in return, any grand gestures, no words of thanks. He simply existed, and in that simple existence, he gave her the strength to move forward. Together, they would venture outside, Theo leading the way with an energy that was infectious. When they walked in the park, he would leap through the grass, his ears flapping with joy, his paws kicking up tufts of dirt as if the world was an endless adventure. It was impossible for Emma to stay sad when she watched him, his happiness so pure and unencumbered. He would look back at her every few steps, as though to make sure she was still there, and every time he did, Emma couldn't help but smile. The seasons passed, and Theo was there for each one. In winter, he would run headfirst into the snow, his coat turning into a blanket of icy frost as he barreled through the drifts, barking joyfully as if he found a secret world. Emma would laugh, pulling her scarf tighter as she watched him. Even on the coldest days, his excitement never waned. His joy was so contagious that she couldn't help but join in, finding herself walking a little taller, laughing a little louder, as if he had given her permission to be light again. In spring, they would sit in the park, watching the world bloom around them. The cherry blossoms that dotted the landscape, the gentle rustling of the leaves, and the bird song that filled the air. These small things were no longer just fleeting moments of beauty. With Theo by her side, they became a shared experience, something to treasure. She would run her hand through his soft fur as they sat together on the grass, and in that peaceful silence, Emma felt more connected to the world than she had ever felt before. Theo had a way of making the ordinary seem extraordinary, and Emma soon realized that she had begun to smile more. It wasn't just the big moments that made her happy, but the small ones, too, like watching Theo chase a fallen leaf in the wind, or feeling the warmth of his body next to hers on the couch. The weight she had carried for so long seemed lighter with him around. The loneliness that had once been an overwhelming presence in her life began to fade. She had never realized how much space it took up until it was gone. With Theo, she felt fuller, as if she had been missing a part of herself for so long that she didn't even know it was gone. But now, with his companionship, she was whole again. She began to wonder how she had ever lived without him. At night, as the two of them curled up in bed, Theo at her feet and Emma wrapped in the warmth of his steady presence, she thought about all the years she had spent alone, all the moments of silence she had endured in her old life. She had thought that being alone was something she was used to, something she could manage. But now, with Theo, she realized how empty it had been. How hollow the days had felt without the constant thump of his tail, the soft sighs of his sleep beside her, the simple but profound connection that had blossomed between them. The world outside was still full of uncertainty, and there were days when Emma still felt the weight of her past pressing in on her. But with Theo by her side, she found the strength to keep going. He didn't offer solutions or advice, he simply existed. And that was enough. Emma had never been the type to believe in fate, but there were moments like when she had first laid eyes on Theo that made her question that. Had this been meant to be? Had this dog, this perfect companion, been waiting for her all this time, just as she had been waiting for him? Perhaps, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Theo was here now, and he was hers. And with him, She had found the one thing she had spent her whole life searching for: connection. Together, they walked through the seasons, hand in paw, each day a little brighter than the last. And Emma, for the first time in a long time, knew that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Years passed, and the seasons changed, as they always do. Emma and Theo grew older, each marked by time, yet bound by a love that had only deepened with every shared moment. In those early days, everything felt like a dream. Those first walks in the park, the joy of his tail wagging at the door when she returned home, the quiet companionship of two souls intertwined. But over the years, something even deeper had grown between them. Emma had built a life that was starting to feel whole. Her job was steady now, and she had friends she could rely on, people who knew her and cared for her. The weight of loneliness that had once been a constant presence in her life had lessened, replaced by the laughter of true companionship, both human and canine. But no matter how much her world expanded, no matter how many new relationships she formed or opportunities came her way, Theo remained her constant, the one unshakable presence in her life. He had become more than just a pet. He was her confidant, the one who never judged her when she cried on those long, hard days when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. He would nudge his head against her knees, his soft eyes filled with understanding, and she would feel a quiet comfort in his presence. When she laughed so hard that it hurt, Theo would wag his tail, jump up beside her, and lick her face, his enthusiasm making everything feel just a little lighter. He had seen her at her best and her worst, through every joy and every tear, and yet he loved her same, always unconditionally. There were times late at night when Emma would lie awake, the weight of the world pressing on her mind. But as she lay there, she would hear the soft sound of Theo's breathing from the end of bed, his steady presence a reminder that she was never truly alone. He was there, as he always had been, her companion through every chapter of her life. She loved him deeply, more than she had ever thought possible to love anyone, human or animal. Theo had shown her what it meant to love without hesitation, without fear of loss. It was the purest form of love she had ever known. And in return, he had given her more than just affection. He had given her a sense of peace, a sense of belonging in a world that had so often left her feeling disconnected. But time, as it always does, moved on. The signs, at first subtle, slowly began to grow undeniable. Theo, who had once bounded across the park with unrestrained joy, was now slower, his steps becoming labored as he walked by Emma's side. His once thick, shiny coat had become thin and patchy, the rich golden hue fading into a duller tone. The spark that had always been in his eyes, the vitality that had defined his spirit, seemed to dim with each passing day. Emma tried to push away the dread creeping in her chest. She had seen the signs, the quiet moments when Theo would pause and look up at her, as though seeking reassurance that everything was still okay. At first, she had convinced herself it was just the natural course of aging. Theo wasn't puppy anymore, after all. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Emma couldn't ignore the growing concern in her heart. The vet's office had been more frequent visits, at first just to check on him, to ease her own worry. But this time was different. The vet's words were slow, measured, and heavy with unspoken meaning. "He's not the same as he was," the vet said quietly, as if he was treading carefully on ground that was too fragile. "There are signs of age, of course, but there's something more. I think it might be time to start preparing yourself. He's slowing down more than just age. There may be illness involved, something that's not easily treated." Emma had nodded, but inside, it felt as though the earth had shifted beneath her. She wasn't ready. She had spent so many years imagining that they would grow old together, her and Theo side by side. He had always been there, steady and constant, through every season of her life. And now, as she looked at him, lying so still in front of her. It felt as though the foundation of her world was beginning to crumble. Her heart ached as she watched him struggle to rise, his once strong legs trembling beneath him. He would pause, panting softly, his eyes seeking her face as if asking for help, asking her to make everything better again. She felt her own tears welling up, but she held them back. For Theo, she had to be strong. He had always been the strong one, the one who was there when everything else seemed uncertain. Every time she touched his head, ran her fingers through his thinning fur, Emma could feel the weight of the years they had shared, the moments they had experienced. She remembered how, in those early days, his joy had been so boundless, how he had never hesitated to show her how much he loved her. And now, as the signs of his aging grew more pronounced, it was as if the roles were beginning to reverse. It was no longer just about Theo being there for her. It was her turn to be there for him, to give him the same kind of love and care he had so freely given her all these years. She wasn't ready for this. How could she be? Theo had been with her through everything, the highs, the lows, the quiet moments and the loud ones. He was a part of her, an extension of her heart. The thought of losing him, of not having him there beside her, was unbearable. Yet, deep down, Emma knew that time was a force she couldn't stop. And so, as Theo lay beside her, his body a little weaker, his steps a little slower, Emma made a silent promise to him. She would be there. She would stay beside him, just as he had done for her all these years. No matter what came, no matter how difficult the days ahead might be, she would stay. She would hold on, just as he had always held on to her. Because Theo wasn't just a dog, he was her heart, her companion, the one constant in a life full of change. And she wasn't ready to let go, not yet. But as time marched forward, Emma knew that the hardest part was yet to come. It was a rainy day again when the final moment arrived. The kind of rain that fell gently, as though the sky itself understood the sorrow of the moment. The rhythm of the raindrops against the window was the only sound in the otherwise quiet room. Inside the vet's office, the air felt thick with grief, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Emma sat by Theo's side, her fingers trembling as they gently stroked his thinning fur. The comforting weight of his head on her lap, his body too weak to rise, felt like the last tether between them, and she couldn't bear the thought of letting go. Theo had been her companion for years, her confidant through heartaches, joys, and all the moments in between. Now, as his once strong body lay frail and still, she could feel the weight of time and love in every heartbeat that they shared. She had known this day would come. Everyone said so. But nothing could have prepared her for the hollow ache she felt in her chest, the emptiness that had already begun to fill her heart. "Please don't go," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I don't know how I'll survive without you." The words felt so small, so inadequate for the depth of the grief she was drowning in. She had spent her life with him. How could she live without the one constant that had seen her through everything? But as the tears blurred her vision, Emma knew the truth. She had always known. Theo had taught her how to love deeply, and now he would teach her how to let go. The journey they had walked together, their laughter, their tears, their quiet moments, and their adventures had shaped her into the person she was today. And now she had to trust that everything he had given her, everything he had taught her, would be enough to carry her forward. As she looked down at him, his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, met hers one last time. His gaze was soft, filled with quiet understanding, and Emma could almost hear him telling her that it was okay, that she would be okay, that his love would live on in her heart, even when his body could no longer be by her side. She bent down, her lips brushing against his forehead in a final, tender kiss. The tears fell freely now, hot and relentless, but Emma didn't care. She couldn't stop them even if she wanted to. With the kiss, she whispered the words she hadn't been able to say before, words that carried the weight of a lifetime of love. Thank you for everything. I will love you always. Theo's eyes fluttered closed one final time, his breath slowing, until the stillness of the room was broken only by the sound of the rain. Emma held him close, not ready to let go, but knowing she had to. She wasn't sure when it happened, when this quiet, unspoken bond between them had woven its way so deeply into her soul that it became impossible to imagine life without him. But now, as she gently ran her fingers through his fur one last time, she understood something. Theo had taught her everything she needed to know. He had shown her how to be vulnerable, how to trust, how to love fully without the fear of loss. And now, he was showing her how to say goodbye. In that moment, Emma realized something that she hadn't been able to put into words before. The love they shared had never been about holding on too tightly. It had always been about the freedom to love deeply and let go when the time came, knowing that love would never truly fade. Her heart shattered, but there was a strange peace that followed. Theo had given her the gift of living fully, of knowing that every moment mattered. She would carry him with her in every step she took from this moment forward. The pain would never fully go away, but neither would the love. Theo had been her heart's compass, her constant through every season. And though his journey had come to an end, Emma's love for him would carry on forever and always. As the rain continued to fall outside, Emma whispered a final goodbye. She would love him always. And she would never forget the dog who had taught her the truest form of love, unwavering, unconditional, and eternal. And as she left the vet's office, Theo's collar clutched tightly in her hand. Emma knew she would carry his spirit with her. He had given her everything, and in return, she had given him all of herself. Even in death, he would never truly leave her, because love, true love, never does. The days that followed Theo's passing were unbearably quiet. Emma wandered through her apartment, the walls feeling like they were closing in around her. The space once filled with the comforting sound of Theo's paws padding across the floor now felt too big, too silent. The echoes of their life together seemed to reverberate through every room, but the stillness was a painful reminder that he was gone. There were no more gentle nuzzles against her hand when she sat down on the couch, no more soft eyes watching her every move with that quiet, unwavering love. The mornings that had once been filled with the warmth of Theo curled up by her side were now spent alone. Emma found herself waking up in the stillness, the silence pressing in on her like a weight she couldn't escape. But in the depth of her grief, something shifted. In the darkest corners of her heart, Emma began to realize that Theo had left her with more than just memories. He had given her the gift of unconditional love, something that was too rare and too precious to be forgotten. Through him, she had learned what it meant to love without hesitation, without fear of loss, and to give all of you to someone who would do the same in return. Theo had been her mirror. Through him, Emma had discovered the parts of herself that she had never fully known, her capacity for deep love, for connection, for joy. And now, as she faced the emptiness of his absence, she also realized that his love had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully understood before. His love had shown her that it was okay to give, even if there was always the risk of pain. It had shown her that the best parts of life often came from giving everything to someone else, even when the future was uncertain. One afternoon, when the weight of the emptiness felt almost unbearable, Emma decided to do something she'd been considering for a while. In the small yard behind her apartment, she planted a garden. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a few flower beds nestled in the corner, but it felt right. She carefully chose flowers bright, vibrant blooms that would remind her of Theo's energy, his warmth, and the love he had brought into her life. There were daisies, his favorite, and sunflowers, bright and tall like the way he had made her feel on even the darkest days. As she worked, she found herself smiling through her tears. She planted each flower with purpose, her fingers gently turning the soil, grounding herself in the act of remembering. This garden, this space filled with color and life, would be her way of holding on to him, of keeping he closes, even when he was no longer physically there. In the months that followed, the garden began to bloom, just as the seasons changed. Every spring, the flowers would return, stretching their petals toward the sun in vivid hues of yellow, pink, and lavender. And every spring, Emma would sit in the garden and remember the joy that Theo had brought into her life, the comfort of his presence, the unwavering love that had filled her heart for so many years. Sitting there, surrounded by the flowers, she could almost feel him beside her again. She could imagine him wagging his tail, sniffing the flowers with the same curiosity he had shown in life. The breeze would carry the scent of the blossoms, and for a brief moment, it felt as though Theo's spirit was still there, watching over her with the same quiet understanding he had always had. She had lost him, but she hadn't truly lost everything. Theo had left behind a legacy of love, a love that would live on in the garden, in the memories they had shared, and in the quiet moments when she thought of him. The love between a woman and her dog doesn't end with goodbye. It lives on in the heart, in the memories, and in the space they leave behind. Emma's life would always carry the imprint of Theo's love. He had shown her that there was beauty in vulnerability, that love didn't always have to come with guarantees, and that the greatest gift was the bond that formed in the quietest moments. Through his love, she had learned to be more fully herself, more open, more connected, and more alive. And now, as she looked at the garden blooming in his memory, she felt his presence in a way she had never expected. In some ways, Theo hadn't left at all. He had simply moved into a different place in her heart, a place where love never fades, where it continues to grow, to bloom, and to fill every corner of her life with warmth and light. And with that, Emma knew that while the pain of losing him would never fully leave, the love he had given her would carry her through. Forever and always, Theo would be her companion, and in her heart, he always would be